Welcome to a fun panel on bridges. So we'll get started very soon. But before that, let me throw in some introductions. I'm Mudit Gupta. I lead security and smart contracts at Polygon. And here we have a collection of interesting people. So some of them, you can see the names up there. And we have a surprise entry in terms of Neve from Hexagate. And I guess I'll let everyone introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they do.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yosuke, and I'm working at two companies. At the first, I am tech lead at Pheasant Network. Pheasant Network is optimistic and liquidity-less bridge focusing on Ethereum layer 2. We support Polygon, Arbitrum, and Optimism for mainnet, and then we support any other layer 2 like Linear and then Base for testnet. Yeah, and then I am also technical advisor at Skyland Ventures, which is Japan-based VC, and then they have investments to Taiko, which is ZK EVM, and then they also have an investment for Orbiter. Yeah, I'm very glad to be here, and then thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Irene. I am head of strategy at LayerZero Labs. LayerZero Labs is the creator of LayerZero, the protocol, and Omnichain Interoperability Protocol, and Stargate, the leading native asset bridge.
Hey, I'm Robert. I help run OtterSec. We read a lot of bridge code. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Valerian. I work for Quantstamp as an auditor, and I made some audits on bridges.
Hi, I'm Hugo, co-founder of Flare Network. Flare is an EVM layer 1 based around optimized data acquisition. The reason I'm here is we've just released a bridge protocol called LayerCake, which is essentially follows an optimistic model, but we think we've solved or have good solutions for the griefing attack that comes along with optimistic models and the slashing issues that are very, very hard to implement with optimistic models. I can explain more later, or you can go to our website, flarelabs.org.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Mudit. I'm Neve. I'm the CTO of Hexagate. We're a real-time Web3 threat intelligence company, basically discovering all the threats and on multiple blockchains. So we help protocols, bridges, essentially like any Web3 developer to be able to detect and prevent any threat that might threaten the protocol or its users. So happy to be here.
Thanks, everyone, for the intros. We have a great set of panelists here. I'll give everyone some context about this panel. So everyone you see here most probably applied for a talk that was related to bridges. And then Muli was like, that's too mainstream. Let's put them all in a panel and let them fight. Let's have some fun. Let's have some drama. And that's why we are here. So in like this 30 minutes of panel or whatever, we can't really change the world, but we can at least have fun. So and that's the aim of this. There is no scripted questions or anything. It's just all going to be from heart, and hopefully we'll have fun. And with that, okay, I'll shoot with first like a Kickstarter question. I'll ask everyone for one bridge they would recommend everyone to use and one bridge they would recommend everyone to avoid.
I can start. So I recommend everyone to avoid the multi-chain bridge following the last event. And essentially, there are great bridges, and I think they're quite unique in the way in the space, in the sense that bridges are mainly off-chain, and that also brings a lot of opportunities to stop attacks, because many times you have a lot of time to protect before an exploit really happens. Of course, it narrows down the attack surface, and it doesn't mean there is no attack surface. So all in all, there is both snark-based bridges like ZK EVM ones, like Polygon recently launched, and it's obviously a great innovation. And Consensus is also about to launched theirs as well, alongside like the optimistic ones, which there are available, which we've been using like extensively, the ones from Arbitrum and Optimism and so on. So all in all, like they're great other bridges which we're using like any day on Hexagate.
Yeah, thanks for that. Let's keep it like bullet points, just one name to avoid, one name to use.
I'm happy to go next. I'll say maybe a hot take, but to your point about reducing code exposure, I would discourage builders from integrating bridge aggregators. And I would encourage people to use Stargate, the most popular native asset bridge built on top of LayerZero.
That's interesting. So I'll come back to that, but anyone else wants to pitch in? Okay, I guess not. Then let's continue with this. This is an interesting one. Why do you not recommend bridge aggregators?
A few different reasons. I think first one is around code exposure. So with bridge aggregators, there's additional middleware that you're introducing there. And on top of that, you're also creating a basket of bridges and thereby increasing the chances that one shard of it will lead to a hack. And so if you're building a wallet, for example, it might make sense for convenience to allow users to just sort of route to the fastest bridge, like in an airline industry or those like flight aggregators. I don't know what they're called, Priceline, something like that. But with bridging, it shouldn't be an airline industry. Like security is actually paramount. It's like don't take the JetBlue when you're transferring your funds. And then I think the other primary reason I would talk about is services versus protocols. A protocol is something that is immutable, an evergreen, open, permissionless. A service requires the creator company to maintain the integrity of the product. And so if in your infrastructure stack, you're leveraging something that requires the liveness of that company, it requires the founder to not be arrested, it requires the devs to not get COVID, then you're building in a lot of dependency into your product. And even things like, is a service that you're leveraging, does it require a significant amount of runway? Will they close their Series A? In crypto, we see a lot of projects that just poof, and like the Slack Connect is gone because they've run out of funds. And so you should be leveraging true protocols and ones that are not dependent on the integrity of human behavior, but also the liveness of a creator company.
Fair points. I wish I had someone from bridge aggregator here. Would have been a fun conversation. But those are very valid points to like, since anyone wants to defend bridge aggregators here? Go ahead.
Yes, actually, this is something that we've thought a decent amount about. I guess, generally when we think about these sorts of bridge aggregators, you have like some set of like end bridges, and then you choose some threshold of the amount of bridges to sign before you pass some sort of message through, right? So for example, if you want to optimize for like really fast messaging, maybe you have like 1 out of n. If you want to optimize for authenticity of messages, maybe you have like n out of n, or like n minus 1 out of n, or like 2/3 of n over n. And I think one difficult part, I kind of agree with Irene, like in the status quo, I think right now, there's not that many super legitimate bridges. And I think one difficulty is that like, n is probably going to be something small, right? Like n is going to be like 3 or 5 or something. And it's pretty difficult to find, maybe like 7 or 10 really reputable bridges that you can even put in some sort of aggregator set. And I think one difficulty there is like if you have, only 3 bridges, if you have a 2 out of 3, that doesn't really give you a super meaningful improvement in security, right? I mean, I think there's like 2 things you want to optimize for. One is like passing correct messages. The other is making sure that you don't expose yourself to unnecessary denial of service risk, right? So if you have like a 3 out of 3 multi-sig, for example, or 3 out of 3 aggregator, if one of the bridges go down, as Irene mentioned, then your entire set goes down, which is probably not great, right? So you probably want something like 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5. That being said, I think as more bridges develop and they become more mature, I feel like if we get to the threshold where we have like 7 bridges that we're really confident about, maybe something like a 4 out of 7 multi-sig or even a 3 out of 5 could make sense, right? If we have 4 out of 7, three of those bridges could go down, and we still preserve critical properties of liveness and safety. And I think that gives you a lot better guarantees than if you just have one bridge. It might be hard to know which one to use, even though there's a lot of relatively solid ones. This way, you're kind of just spreading out the risk.
That makes sense. I, for one, I'm not a hater of bridge aggregators. I actually use them. They're super cool, but in a different way. So I don't, as Irene was saying, integrating with the bridge aggregators is, I think, risky, at least right now. The way I use them is to search for the bridge that actually supports from where I want to go. I want to go from this weird chain X, from this weird chain B, and I have no idea which bridge actually supports it. LayerZero maybe, but probably not if these are two weird chains. So I just go to the bridge aggregator, and then it tells me which all bridges actually support this path, and then I can choose the best one. I can go there directly and do it. So it's a good
search and discovery.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say there is a huge green space or white space for a tool like this. And even myself, when I'm doing daily diligence on different pathways, I have so many tabs open at once. But then with bridge aggregators, I will say there are oftentimes issues with the data that they're actually pulling there. And I think every other day we are in conversation with these teams about how to fine tune that.
Yeah, for sure. They'll get better, but yeah, there's something there they can work on. Okay, moving on to the next question. So as we have seen, bridges are a technology that is constantly under attack, especially now. The last few big hacks in this space have been all related to bridges. Multi-chain, Nomad, Ronin, Harmony, all of these bridge over $100 million hacks. So to the folks here on the panel, on the bridges that are left, not many are left, but among the ones that are left, and even the ones that have recently gone down, what common weaknesses do you see? What problems do you see in the bridges right now?
Is this on? Yeah. And the biggest fear I have for bridges is essentially criminal charges over essentially what a bridge is. The majority of the bridge models, maybe exclude optimistic, maybe exclude LayerZero, but certainly the multi-sig based bridges. So that's essentially, it could be painted as a conspiracy to transmit funds that have not been vetted. And to me, I think, with the SEC losing, pretty heavily against, Ripple, I think that another vector of attack is more sort of criminally based around money transmission without compliance.
It's a weakness, but it's also a consequence of a trade-off. I would say that if a protocol wants to increase the security of some parts, they would have to increase the centralization, for instance, and the centralization has some positive effects in terms of security over the whole system, but in the other way, it has also some drawbacks. And a lot of bridges have some weaknesses based on the components used, but from another perspective, we can also consider this as a choice, a design choice, and we have to be aware of all the components of the bridge before trying to using it.
Yeah. Maybe another comment from my end is that I don't really view bridges as some unique creature, substantially from DeFi protocols, but only the fact there's only the fact that they're normally are in charge of custodying lots of funds because they connect chains together, and this is why they become so lucrative to attackers. And the fact they're a bit more of a complex beast, it makes them much more interesting for attackers to actually research. Because in a DeFi protocols, eventually, you have a few primitives that you can work with the protocol. On a bridge, you have so much more, and many of the attacks that you've mentioned, Mudit, were around even private key compromises, and that's only just Web 2 kind of threats for bridges. And this is because the team has probably haven't figured a way to actually operate the bridge in a decentralized and more secure manner, but rather just have those keys managed in an unsecure way. So I would say like just really hard to cluster like vulnerabilities on bridges, but rather say that the attack surface is so vast as opposed to just vast as opposed to just DeFi protocol. So it just can be anything like private keys, managing possibly like the bridge, all the possibly Merkle proofs that can be like validated in the wrong manner, and possibly tokens can be attacked as well, because then you get like unbacked minting and so on. They're just like so composable in their nature, so it makes them the attack surface just bigger.
I have a feeling Robert will probably speak to this as well. We've used OtterSec for audits. But to your point around the risk vectors for bridges being similar to just general protocols, the majority of bridge hacks over the last year were due to smart contract upgrades and largely made by protocol developers who were intending to introduce something that was positive, like a new feature or patching something. And so if you're using upgradable contracts to build a bridge, you are introducing all of the protocols that have integrated your bridge or all of the users to the risk of like widespread contagion. In the same way that you would never accept an upgrade pushed to your Trezor or to your ledger, why would you do the same for your DeFi protocol? You should be able to opt into it, and those contracts should be immutable. And so that was something that really informed how we designed the LayerZero protocol. How do you design a messaging protocol that is entirely comprised of immutable smart contracts, but also enables evolution with research over time, with better validation techniques, since what we're using today should not and will not be what we use 5 to 10 years from now. And then to your point around, my fellow panelists' point around like government crackdowns and things like that, also designing a bridge or messaging protocol to be censorship resistant, for example, from day one, and comprised, again, built with immutable smart contracts, guarantees that your technology cannot then comply with or be perverted to fit into different regulatory environments. If you build your technology in a way so that it can, it will be. But if you create these primitives that are evergreen and simply cannot, then they won't.
I guess I'd kind of can I ask a question, or can I disagree with people?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yes, I guess one thing on the legal risk. I think I think you mentioned like the legal risk, right? I guess I wanted to clarify a little bit. When you say legal risk, are you saying that bridges are too centralized because there's like one entity that is exposed to all of this legal risk, or is it like bridges as a whole? Like if you send funds illicitly, like the entire bridge can be taken?
No, I think it's essentially, I think Irene's comment between the protocol and the service provision, right? Which is, if you look at, a multi-sig bridge, you have some set that have come together in some manner, usually without, a decentralized process to come together, usually an agreement between each other. That is, if those people are transferring funds across chain that are essentially from a rotten source, that could very easily be painted as a conspiracy to launder money.
Okay, I think that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, for sure. That's definitely an interesting risk vector, and for sure the governments have their eyes on that. But us being more experts in the tech, let's move on to the tech questions. So I'll ask that, like on bridges, it's true, like there are different types of bridges, not all bridges are same. I broadly categorize them in 3 categories: centralized, MPC bridges, and then the decentralized bridges, which work on proofs and so on. So on that, the MPC bridges have seen lots of hack recently with multi-chain, for example, like turns out all of their keys were with one person, even though they claim to be MPC. Similarly with Ronin, they were MPC, but 5x9, and 4 of them were one entity, and that entity also had access to the 5th. So again, just one centralized player. And similar thing with Harmony. So an open question here from a technology perspective, that how would you guarantee or trust an MPC bridge that they are actually using the proper MPC technology and aren't just hiding behind MPC as a wall?
I think we should add some redundancy at the level of the communicator. So to change the communicator has a role to watch what happens on the source chain, to verify if it's a malicious or normal request, and then to relay on the destination. And the MPC is only one communicator. And I think if we could add different technologies, concurrent, and to make a kind of meta MPC with 2 out of 3 different protocols or different solutions, maybe we could have a better and more secured way to communicate and to relay the messages. However, I think it would come with more commissions because more people would be involved. However, the risk of collusion would be lower.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this question is, I guess, more about like how do we ensure decentralization of any validator set, right? Like I think, the root cause of these hacks, I don't think was like MPC. I think it was that, the CEO had all of the validators on his personal AWS account, and like once the guy got arrested, it seemed like that was a single point of failure. I mean, I feel like this is a pretty hard problem, right? It's like you can attest, and I think Multi-Chain did attest, in fact, that they had a relatively independent validator set. When we asked them, I think they claimed that they only owned like 7 out of 22 of the validators. But I think it's really up to the community or people to like dig into the identity of these validators and try to ensure that they are like indeed independent entities that are hopefully reputable and have their own control, right? Because I think otherwise it's pretty hard, like from a pure technology standpoint, like only looking at the chain, I think it's essentially impossible to determine that like the end user of these EOAs or of these private keys are actually different. It requires some off-chain sleuthing or some additional analysis that to paint a more complete picture.
I would just add that another mechanism I've seen more or less implemented by the next solution of Chainlink is to have the actors playing the role of the communicator, split it in 2 roles. One that is doing the communication part and one that is doing the verification that the validators are doing the right job or not. And it's like a level of verification inside the verification component. I think that approach of separating the roles and having 2 concurrent roles, both incentivized to act in favor of the protocol, could be a solution.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I kind of disagree. I mean, I think that like at the end of the day, you have like data from one chain and you want to get to another, right? And then like however you slice it, you have different parties attesting to that data, and then you want to like abstractly you want to like take some aggregate set of those signatures and then come to some sort of conclusion about if that data passing is valid, right? So I think you could split it up into 2. You could have like 2 different roles, and maybe like one set needs to agree, and then the other set also needs to agree, and maybe that mitigates risk somehow. But I think that still kind of runs into the same issue of like if everything's centralized, you're still screwed, right? I don't think it really fundamentally solves the problem. You could slice it up into 3 roles. Like maybe you have like 3 different stages. Like one person proposes, another person like approves, and then the final person executes, right? But does that really change anything? Like I think kind of at the end of the day, if we're using these bridges, we really need to dig deep and kind of understand, like, are these actually separate entities, or are they just like pretending or masquerading to be?
I'll add one thing, which again is more from the smart contract risk angle rather than the human engineering side, which is that client diversity matters a lot as well. We talk about it in very different contexts, like the Ethereum validator context. But in this case, if a bridge has, requires 13 out of 19 validators to agree, but all of the validators leverage ultimately like the same code or created by the same dev company, then the vulnerabilities that are introduced into one are like multiplied across all of those. And so that's incredibly important to keep in mind as well. And some of the architectures that exist right now don't actually encourage client diversity or aren't open and permissionless to allow other protocols to run some of these off-chain components and actively participate in their security layer.
That's a very interesting point. So on that, like, how does LayerZero promote client diversity?
So it's interesting that you were talking about Chainlink and their architecture. Ours is slightly different. LayerZero deploys endpoints on all of the chains which we support. So these are EVMs, non-EVMs, rollups, apps chains, etc. These endpoints are smart contract libraries, and these are immutable. Between the endpoints are the off-chain entities, which we call the oracles, plural, and relayers, plural. And all an oracle has to be is an entity which can retrieve and submit a block hash. And all a relayer has to be is an entity that can retrieve and submit a transaction proof. So there are two separate tasks that need to be put into play. The protocol determines which oracles and relayers they select. And of the oracles consortium, it could be 3 out of 5, it could be 2 out of 3 that have to form a, let's say, like a yes from the oracle side. And same with the relayer side. The protocol can run one of those components, meaning the protocol could run a relayer of the relayer consortium, and one of the oracles could be, let's say, the top 50 delegates of their protocol and provide more utility to their protocol token in this way. And the message can only pass across the protocol if both the oracles and relayers consortium form an agreement. Otherwise, if one of those consortiums disagrees, the message reverts. So this is sort of base security layer here and allows applications to price their security as they'd like. So if you're building a game and you're transacting 5-cent NFTs between chains, it might make sense to use the custom Chainlink DON that was built for LayerZero and the LayerZero Labs relayer. But if you're Circle and you are moving USDC between chains as an omni-chain token, you probably want to price your security a lot higher. You might want to run one of those components yourself. You may pull in a highly reputable entity to run one of these relayers, and you can add in more as you'd like. If you're a decentralized protocol, then your governance can vote to add more or swap in and out oracles or relayers based off their liveness and their performance. That is how we encourage client diversity. Each of these entities are built by different dev companies, and it's in the hands of the application to price. Therefore, LayerZero is the line of security there.
Makes sense. That's super nice. So security with bridges, with everything, it's a continuous process. So we have discussed a lot about things you can do really before launching the bridges or at any moment of time. But there is one aspect, which is monitoring and incident response, which you gotta pay attention to once you have launched the code, once everything is live. So on that aspect, an open question to everyone. First of all, maybe let's start with the good things this time. So any bridge you are seeing right now which is doing something right? Any example you can share?
I don't want to speak too much, so
any bridge that is doing monitoring or incident response right, or any protocol in general?
Yeah, so
nobody is doing it right, I guess.
Yeah, so I think maybe this circles back to the recommendation part where you asked for recommended bridges. So obviously there is a spectrum, and obviously teams with less personnel would have less capacity to handle security processes and all of that. And when you have bigger teams which develop a bridge, they have much more capacity in order to initiate the right security processes, the right incident response plan, the right monitoring in place, mapping all the threats and monitoring for them. So of course there is when we I don't like this term the diligencing a bridge, because eventually the UX has to be abstracted, and it really depends on what chains you want to move from. But for instance, if you take big companies running bridges, normally what you see is that they're really minded about security, and then they employ things like monitoring, incident response, in mapping out invariants in order to look for those invariants in real time and so on. And from our experience with working with bridges, what we normally see when a bridge is like incorporated into securing the bridge, like they work with us, we map out like all the known threats. Like for instance, just given an example, like if you're running even a layer 2, like which I treat like layer 2 to layer 1 token bridge, if it's doing like a ZK EVM or type of bridge, it's a very complex technology, like for just a few auditors to just audit and conclude a snark is okay. Like the arithmetics are okay and all the circuits are just make sense. And if the bridge is that huge, it makes obviously a huge opportunity for attackers to actually research that and find a vulnerability. So for instance, like mapping all those threats as a company operating a bridge and then monitoring for what happens if someone finds a vulnerability in the snark, like without knowing what the vulnerability is, like maybe we can monitor when the snark validation breaks. So what we see as a company is that like normally when you mature and you grow, like those big companies like Polygon and others, when they launch new stuff like that, normally they also are really minded for monitoring, mapping all those known threats, monitoring for the unknown threats, and so on. So I think this is kind of a quick way to do a diligence of who is like have the capacity and security personnel to actually run an incident response plan and like security, like the right security processes in order to protect the bridge.
Yeah, that's cool.
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been like a little skeptical of monitoring. I mean, I think like, do you really care if, like, do you really want people to tell you that you've lost $5 million, or would you like rather not lose $5 million in the first place, right? Like, I think monitoring is kind of funny because it's like, oh, after we got hacked, okay, now we know that we lost $100 million. But it's like, okay, it's kind of late now, right? You know, I think bridges, I think there are like meaningful mitigations bridges can do. I just don't know if they're on the monitoring side. Like, for example, one thing that I think LayerZero does and a couple other bridges is having some sort of rate limit on the total amount of withdrawals. I think this is pretty intuitive, right? Like if we have some sort of random chain, it probably doesn't need to be sending $50 million back to Ethereum mainnet, right? Like where does that money come from? I think there's a lot of sane mitigations in terms of rate limits that probably make more sense, that could help mitigate even in the case of say a relayer compromise or like some sort of endpoint compromise on the other chain. At least you can limit the amount of damages, and I feel like that goes a really long way, as opposed to having some sort of monitoring setup that's like, okay, we lost $30 million, but it's kind of late now.
Yeah, maybe a small comment from my end on the monitoring side. So, like there is a spectrum from monitoring. Like from our perspective, like when we monitor stuff, like our goal is eventually to detect the threat like beforehand. So in the case of bridges, like many times, like it really depends on the bridge. Like many times, especially for bridges, because there is the off-chain component, and sometimes there is a delay before anything happens. And also, like, there is sometimes a natural delay for attackers when they deploy just the attack code, the contract, which gives like opportunity for companies like us to detect the threat upfront. But again, in bridges, like, you have much more opportunity to also detect detect threats before they impact any digital assets. Like, for example, if you monitor like for a bridge which does like a multi-sig kind of signing, so many times, like before withdrawal is even possible, like you could monitor like whenever the multi-sig has concluded that some withdrawal is possible. For example, there are many examples of multi-sig bridges which like do that, and if you had monitored like in real time the fact that something bad is going to happen before like the malicious withdrawal happens, then you're able, given like the right processes, because it's inseparable from monitoring, you're able to mitigate the threat. So monitoring can take like we're aiming for pre-hack.
Oh yeah, I think we're talking about similar things then. I guess you're talking about like monitoring as the transaction goes through the bridge and not like after it like lands on the other side.
Yeah, on that, like I can. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think probably bridges that are trusted probably need a lot of monitoring, because as we've basically been discussing most of this conversation is how do you make a trusted bridge essentially as decentralized and least trusted as possible whilst it's still trusted. But when it comes to something like an optimistic bridge, you still need quite a lot of monitoring, specifically to monitor are people submitting fraud proofs? And because if a malicious event is missed, your window is finite.
One thing that we had observed and learned from with a lot of these bridge hacks was, issues with accounting, for example, that show up in how these smart contracts are written. And so we created something called pre-crime, and we actually don't talk about it very much, but we'll do moving forward, since we are working to scale this so that it protects all applications that have integrated LayerZero. Pre-crime is a proprietary security module which forks every message that goes across the protocol and tests it locally against a set of invariants determined by the application. Only then do the messages get pushed back and run across mainnet. And it's called pre-crime to stop a hack before it happens. And so that invariant could be like accounting around avoiding the double spend problem. It could also be, if you're an NFT project and integrating LayerZero to enable seamless movement, native movement between chains. It could just be like whitelisted addresses, whatever you'd like for that invariant to be as the application developer. And this is what has protected Stargate since its launch more than a year and a half ago, through its peak of 4.4 billion in TVL, the whole team just watching every single black hat attacker try and break the protocol. This is what protected it. And then in addition to Robert's point about rate limiting, which we have introduced, when we launched the Aptos bridge for the new non-EVM layer 1 last fall, we decided to adjust the block confirmations and set them to be incredibly high. It was, arduous. It took about 3 days for transfers out of Aptos. However, that was a security measure we took because it was a new chain and there are a lot of unknowns. Over time, we've been reducing those block confirmations, but one thing that LayerZero enables and we built into the protocol was ownership of the application developer to determine those block confirmations. And so if you're trying to avoid like reorgs involved with a particular chain, you might want to set those higher. If, again, pricing your risk. If you're just transacting 5-cent NFTs, maybe you set all of the block confirmations really low, and that's okay.
Yeah, 100% makes sense. Monitoring is like a lot more, obviously, than just detecting a hack once it has happened. So, yeah, obviously, like once the hack has already happened, then detecting it is not as important, at least for the protocol. But monitoring is a lot more than that, especially for bridges where there is a time delay between the transaction initiation and settlement. You can intercept a malicious transaction in between that time. So for optimistic rollups, as mentioned, like you need fraud proofs. So someone needs to be generating everything happening on the chain to generate these fraud proofs. For like other bridges, you can monitor smart contracts being deployed that might try to create malicious messages to your protocols and things like that. So there are a bunch of monitoring tooling that is definitely important. And even like oftentimes you can white hack during a hack. A good example would be Nomad Bridge. So Nomad Bridge was like slowly hacked over hours by many parties. It was kickstarted by, I believe it was a black hat. I don't remember if they returned the funds or not. And then like a bunch of white hats kicked in and started rescuing what they can. So that only like if they had even better, they had some monitoring, and that's why like all of this, they could respond in time. But if you work on monitoring more, maybe you have playbooks define some automation around this that like kicks off automatically when something is detected, then maybe you can act faster, save more funds, and so on. So it is important. And this reminds me of a interesting war room story I had. And I think let's start discussing some war room stories, ideally around bridges, but whatever comes to your mind. I'll start with this one, which is related to monitoring and why it's important. So in this space, lots of people, not just protocols, are monitoring the chain for malicious transactions. And I guess we have only 1 minute, so I'll round off this story really quick. But there is one group which monitors for hacks so that they can short the token and make money. So what they do is I won't go into specifics of how they do it because like that's also a secret sauce for them, let's say. But if they detect anything that is about to go wrong, they will short the token. If something doesn't go wrong and now their short position is whatever, they will reach out the protocol, tell them, hey, like we detected this in your protocol, have a look. So it's a very interesting ideology, which is like sustainable. So I was in one war room where they detected something and then nothing happened. So they reached out to the protocol within like 10 minutes that, hey, we detected this, but your protocol hasn't been drained yet. The protocol, without understanding what this is, immediately immediately paused the protocol as their response, which is good. At this point, they only had a contract address, which was private source code. And all they knew was this contract has been deployed by a malicious address, a known malicious address, and it interacts with their contracts. So at this point, they don't know if it's a hack or they are just using the protocol, but they paused it. And then we spent next 1 hour decompiling the contract, understanding what it does, and it turns out it indeed was an active attack that they were going to pull off. Nobody knows why the attacker didn't execute the transaction. Maybe they were testing it. Maybe gas was too high. That was expensive times or whatever. But they deployed the exact, like the attack contract, but didn't execute it yet. And within like 1 hour, this team, although detected by someone else, but was able to pause the protocol, fix the vulnerability, and save all of the TVL they had. So monitoring can be important, just because like in this space, although everything can be instantaneous, it usually isn't. People do things one by one. Like it's still being run by immature kids. Like most of the hacks are being done by immature people, if I'm being honest. So you still have time to respond, and that's why it's important. Before we wind up, so I'll leave it open for like final comments if anyone has, like really short, 30 seconds maybe.
The modern monitoring, I think it is important to have a mechanism that can minimize the damage even if your smart contract has an exploit or hacked, because like, yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
I think as a community, we really should focus on building trustless bridges, not making trusted bridges safer.
Okay, that's solid. So we have next panel on auditing. I'll warm up the audience with an auditing question, fun question here. So everyone, we started by asking everyone, like, name your favorite bridge and least favorite bridge. Let's do it for auditors. Name your favorite auditor and least favorite auditor. Go ahead.
I can give a shout out to some auditors, and I'm super lucky to have like personal relationships with a bunch of them. One sitting next to me, which is Robert from OtterSec. We're also a huge fan of the Zelic team, the Zokyo team, Paladin team, and always looking for more. One thing I'm super proud of at LayerZero is we have spent more money on audits across every single protocol in crypto. So we're in tens of millions at this point, and we are happy to keep spending money on audits. Every piece of code we push is immutable, and even if it's 4 lines of code, we will get multiple audits. So if you're an auditor and you also want to be my friend, come find me.
Anyone else wants to name anyone? I guess not. Then we'll round it up here. Thanks everyone for being on the panel, and
Thank you,
thanks
Mudit.
for the audience.
Thank you.